I'll let you guys in on a little secret. There's a lot of video ideas that I have that don't get made because they don't quite reach the format of an entire video, or because I cannot find a good way to package the video. So what I want to do today is I want to brush all of that aside, combine some of these ideas that I picked up on this one single production and just show them all to you. So this is the project. This is actually a project that I've never shown on YouTube before. It's a lot more progressive. Let's have a look at the structure already just to start off, and you can see that there's a lot of these breaks. This is something that I recently discussed in one of my other videos, where I noted that progressive psytrance as opposed to full-on does a lot more in terms of small breaks and small fills, and just overall has a little bit of a different structure. So that's the very first thing. This gives us things like this, where we have this small MIDI break between two parts of the drop. And overall, what this does for your track is that you have fewer individual sections of drop, fewer individual sections that you, for example, have to worry about the synths and all of the sequences and stuff that you're going to put in there. But there's overall more flow and more parts of the track where you have to think about how it's going to transition from one element to the next. And there's actually a few elements that I use for that. For example, there's this element down here, which is, I think, the last element that I added to this track. And you can hear that this element rises, goes down, and then rises again. The first time that it rises is just the wavetable position going up. This is a wavetable, I believe, somewhere from Dada's pack. Unfortunately, I don't actually have the exact pack anymore from which this is from. Maybe Dada knows if this is one of his presets. It doesn't really matter where this wavetable is from. All you need to know is that by turning up the wavetable position, it rises. You can just see that the waveform looks like it's gaining more and more high frequencies. And then the second time that we're rising is actually after the sound itself stops playing. We just have a massive delay tail that we're modulating and in fact even turning up in volume. As you can see, this is the dry wet going from 40% to 100. And then we're using the frequency shifter to just rise that element up. This is obviously also going to rise it in frequency, but this way it's a little bit different of a rise than we had before with the wavetable, and you just get a little bit of a different texture. Now these transitions are placed in the way that the first sound rises up until this point here, where we change from the kick and bass into the kick and bass filtered, and then the second one rises up exactly to this part where the rising of all of the other elements also stops. Now it's really clear from the first element where exactly the transition happens. This other element that I want to show makes it so that it's not really clear where it happens. This is an element that it doesn't really serve the purpose of accentuating where the transition happens. So for example, this element where we saw the wavetable at its highest point is also where we transition from the normal kick and bass into the filtered kick and bass. Right here, this element just kind of glosses over it and just fades out over this time here. You can now hear that there's nothing that really indicates where the transition is supposed to be. And combining these different effects can create some really cool ways of transitioning, as you heard before. Now before we continue, I do quickly want to say that if you're new to this channel, make sure that you're subscribed and that you like the video. Also, if you want to support me financially, you can do so through my Gumroad, where you can buy my products, or on my Patreon page, where you can actually get discount codes for my products. So if you're really smart, you go support me on Patreon, and then you go over to my Gumroad to get some of my products. Obviously, if you're interested in those products. Links for both are going to be in the description. With that being said, let's get back into the video. The next thing that I want to show is how I go from the progressive kick and bass into the rolling kick and bass.
It's time to understand that if you want to get something out of your life, you got to work for it.
Now there's a few interesting things to note here as well. The very first thing is that what essentially happens here is that we have the old elements that are part of the progressive kick and bass kind of filtering out, and then the new elements filtering in. You can just hear that the transitions from this slower element here into this faster rhythmical element here. The next interesting thing is that I don't immediately go into like the full speed kind of rolling kick and bass. First of all, this kick and bass has a little bit of a melody. As you can see right here, this is just kind of going up and down, and that's actually following the melody of the sequence itself, the sequence that we're building up in the beginning here. Right now this track is still in production, so there's a lot more elements that are going to be added. Specifically, this part still feels a little bit empty, but one of the things that is very crucial here is that this vocal right here is going to be on its own. There's probably going to be a little bit more of a build-up in this part of the track, and these vocals might get masked a little bit more, but they are setting up the vocal that is playing right here, and that is just kind of really like a slow element. You can imagine you just have a pause, and then there's just this one vocal, and then we go into the kick and bass. That is not really something that really hypes up the energy. So what I'm essentially doing from a songwriting perspective is I'm giving the listener a little bit of time to think about, okay, we're now in the rolling kick and bass, and then we have this little fill here, and this is where we go full energy. You can see all of the drums coming in. You can see that we have this very nice grid synth sequence here. And we have some more one-shots to support that. So really this space is where the real energetic part of the track exists. The next interesting thing that I'm doing in this project is working around a vocal. This is something that I've advocated a lot for in the past. When I write music, I really like to have a very strong theme, and vocals are a great way of doing that. In this case, what I did is I found this singing vocal here, which just sounds amazing. And I found this a little bit later on in the writing process. If I had found it earlier on, I would have probably used it in the entire track. But this part of the track was basically the way it is right now when I found this vocal. So what I decided to do is I decided to use it as my main break vocal. This was actually a pretty long vocal. As you can see, we are using 20 bars just for it to kind of sit in there. And this is one of the things about like very progressive types of psytrance. It tends to be the case that the breaks are much longer. I talked about this in the track breakdown that I did on the Spin Twist Records kind of track. That is more like prog. This would be more progressive in my opinion. At least that is the distinction that I like to make. Some other people call it like mainstream psytrance versus progressive psytrance. I don't really know, nor do I really care. I just write the music the way that I want to write it. But if I really had to classify it, I would call this progressive in the same style as, for example, like Asterix does. And for that kind of style, what you'll often see is that the breaks are, again, just very, very long. You can see, you can count here. This is the breakdown, and then we have another 16 bars of build-up. In the build-up, we're bringing the vocal back with the expectation that it's going to take over the drop as well. But there's also this acid line kind of coming in, and that is giving it a lot more power. So you can hear that we're actually not going into this vocal again. Even though it's playing right here, we're not going to go back into it. Where we are going back into the vocal is in the next section, where I actually had to warp the vocal a little bit for it to be a little bit shorter, so that it actually could just play the way that I wanted to. And what I essentially wanted for this vocal is I wanted to start right at the halfway point of this build-up section here. So this is the build-up section. I can show you that right here. This is the build-up part, and then we have the little fill part here. And that's going to sound somewhat like this. And as you can hear, this is just a very high energy section in terms of the drums, but the elements that sit on top of it are actually fairly low energy. These vocals are very long and drawn out, and they don't progress very fast. There's this one sequence in here which does add a little bit of extra energy, which is just this like very metallic bandpass plug kind of thing. This is really there to just keep the energy a little bit more. Without it, it's just going to sound too boring. And again, over the course of this production, I might add more elements to this part as well. But for now, I really like the idea of the vocals just having all of the space here to just stand out. And one of the ways that I'm just keeping the energy a little bit is through the transgate, which, as you can see, I don't really like a static transgate on vocals. I think it sounds very easy almost. So what I'm doing is I'm constantly turning it up and down in mix. As you can see throughout the automation here, it's just going up, down, up, down, up. And the whole point is that I'm doing that together with the vocals. And again, I'm writing around the vocals. The transgate really is adapting to the way that the vocal speaks. In the sense that if the vocal is drawn out the most, that is where I turn up the transgate. This is really like where it's holding a long note. I just will turn up the transgate. The same is true here. The same is kind of true here. It does change up a little bit here, but again, a little bit of change to that rule again makes things exciting. So overall, I'm adapting this mix parameter here, the way that the mix is turning up and down to the vocal itself. And this actually took quite a long time of really fine-tuning it. It is one of the main sounds of the track, so I do like to spend the time actually thinking about it and experimenting with exactly where the transgate needs to turn on and off. So really that is all that I wanted to show for this video. As I said, all of these things are just nice tips that you might take away, but it's not something that is big enough to make a whole video on. I might revisit this track a little bit more once I'm finished with the production. I might start using it to show off some sounds in my shorts, because there's also some really cool sound design going on that I can definitely convert in some short videos as well. But for now, this is going to be it. So I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.